Thank you. And Mike Leigh. Yay!
Thank you.
It's nice to be. It's a year on since we last spoke, I think. And
here.
Yeah. And, well, obviously, we've just spoken in the foyer.
No, we've had a few conversations.
Yes.
Privately,
yes. But just picking up on the stuff we've done here, retrospective conversations about all your features. I divided them in a completely haphazard way. Family films with an alienated central or protagonist, and this happily is in both categories because it's essentially structured around two sisters, which is not foreign territory because Bleak Moments, your very first feature, also two sisters and various other
there are
things.
siblings in quite a lot.
Quite a lot of them, yeah. And she's, my God, Pansy is as alienated from the world as they come. And how did she emerge from your conversations with Marianne?
Well, as always, there are different things on the go. I mean, everybody, and I am going to presume that this may apply to everybody here, can say, I know a pansy. Put your hand up if you don't know a pansy. Thank you. So obviously, there are, to put it simply, there are pansies in my experience. So there's all that. And so there's a sort of, I had some notions, but as you know, and we've talked about it a lot here and elsewhere, that for me, and thus with everybody, with the collaborators, the discovery as to what the film is we make on the journey of making the film, in the way that people paint pictures and write novels and etc. Starting with the premise that Marianne Jean-Baptiste was going to be involved, which is a long overdue reconnecting, because of course, famously, as we know, she was wonderfully there in Secrets and Lies, and actually, the beginning of our working relationship was in a play called It's a Great Big Shame at Stratford East in 1993, when she and Michelle Austin, who plays Chantal, were sisters, actually. And, of course, Michelle, incidentally, was, of course, Hortense, Marianne's character in Secret, Hortense's best friend. So that they have a long collaboration with me. But starting from the premise that Marianne was going to be involved, obviously that pointed in the direction of two things, one of which is obvious, that I thought, well, okay, having looked at different sections of society in quite a wide over a range in my various films and indeed plays, as in, I made a film in Northern Ireland about Catholics and Protestants, Republicans and Loyalists. I did a play in Sydney about Greek Australians. I did a play at the National Theatre about Jews, for which you wrote the score. I have looked at different classes, and of course, black folk have popped up here and there in my film. So I thought, okay, now it's the time to focus on this corner of society. But with regards to your question and working with Marianne, she's now a very, very experienced and extremely clever middle-aged actress. And, not only is she like all the sorts of actors I like to work with, which is to say character actors who don't play themselves but are good at doing real people out there in the street and are versatile. She is the consummate character actor. She has a great sense of humour. She has a great streak of naughtiness, which I share with her. She has a great sense of the grotesque, and she's very firmly rooted in real life. She lives in LA. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but she's very grounded indeed. So we were able to push the boat out, really, and it's a major achievement, obviously. You talk about the initial conversations. Well, I did what I always do with every actor I work with, which is to start with a long list of people that the actor knows, and I start to draw from that, and we start to evolve a character. And that's what we did. And, the great thing is, I mean, people talk about, quite ignorantly often, about method acting and the actor being the character and all. I mean, as I say, it's important that we're talking about character acting. And because someone like Marianne, and indeed, frankly, all the guys in
everyone,
this film, because I am overwhelmed by the quality of the acting that I'm privileged to work with in this film, which includes all the minor characters, the people that had very small. I mean, everybody really delivers, but they're all doing that thing of which Marianne is the consummate queen, which is to be able to really go to extremes within the discipline of it being real, basically. And so we were able to open up and explore this complex, sad woman.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating counterpoint that she is absolutely out there with the vocabulary and the wit and the incisiveness and the energy, and she's also incredibly depressed, and that it's a I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, because it's normally one thing or the other, isn't it?
Yes, although it's interesting you say what you just have, because it's weirdly, it's not a
Oh no, I'm sure it isn't. No. It's the energies that are absolutely kind of they're not. I don't think that I've ever seen a depiction of that particular double of those things. You talked then just there, you talked about wanting to just focus on with a black cast on a particular experience. I know, and you've said elsewhere, that actually the project that this was going to be, or that's not very, suggests that hard truths existed, which it didn't, but the project that might have involved Marianne was not necessarily this one. It was,
well, it's a question. That really is kind of beyond academic. We were going to make a film, which Marianne was going to do, and the pandemic scuppered it. That's as simple as that. Now, we'd already done the auditions, so I mean, it's completely. We can only speculate whether it would have been the same film or a different film. The only thing that would have been definitely different is that, excuse me, I absolutely knew that I wanted to have Marianne and Michelle Austin. And when we were going to do, this is very, very, we shouldn't dwell on this more than 1 second, really, isn't it? Very, very marginal interest. When we were going to do the film that was cancelled because of the pandemic, Michelle was not available. Oh. She was committed to a play at the National Theatre, which she couldn't get out of, and blah, 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 all that. So I guess if we'd made that film, she wouldn't have been in it. Therefore, you could argue it wouldn't have been the same film. That's all I have to say. But this is completely theoretical.
But there was also another project which was something to do with, if I can remember correctly, and you'll correct me, as I know you will. You took to the BBC a project about immigration.
No, actually, what happened? What it was the idea was for a feature film in the first place on quite a big scale, where you would. I never talk about ideas that I've had, but I will on this one because it's never going to happen. The idea was that you'd have a group of young people who are friends or in some way or related to each other, who were from different ethnic, racial backgrounds, such as you get groups now. And you'd explore them. But from time to time, during the course of the action, it would suddenly, as it were, cut to a flashback, so to speak, of the moment of the arrival in the UK of their grandparent or antecedent or ancestor or parent or whoever it was. And, we prepared a document and all that. Somebody who knows a lot about stuff, a producer, a friendly producer, said, look, you should do this as a series of television films. If you go to the BBC, guaranteed it'll happen. So we approached a BBC producer who was very enthusiastic and said, I'd really like to do this. And it's something that we could and should do at the BBC. But this producer said, you'll have to come and meet the head of content. And there is a person, a woman, who is the head of content at the BBC. I'm sure she's not here this evening. And we went to meet this person. And to cut a long story short, she rejected the project on the grounds that, well, we don't know what we're going to get. Which, considering, without being arrogant, what I've been doing for 500 years, including at the BBC, back in the day, was kind of pretty offensive. That is all we should say about that, and I think we should move on.
Very good, but I'm very glad it's out there because there's another project which could have and didn't. Okay, let me talk about or ask about Dick Pope, who we lost. This was his final film.
Great cinematographer, a great colleague, a great friend, a great guy, a very funny guy, a great curmudgeon, a narc, a wonderful guy to work with. He shot all my films since Life is Sweet in 1990, everything I've done on the screen, and lots of other films for which he's very famous. He lit and operated all of our films. He didn't operate this film because he'd been already was poorly, and it was operated by a long-term colleague of ours, Lucy Bristow. And he died 7 weeks ago, something like that. Just at the time we were premiering this film at the London Film Festival. And it's I mean, I don't want to be self-indulgent, and you will appreciate it's a great loss. His contribution went way beyond. I mean, here's the thing. I reflect on, I can put actors on a stage in the theatre. Any director can do that, with or without, in any circumstances. But people talk about directors making films. No director can make a film without. It's the cinematographer, the director, and the cinematographer. I can't make a film happen without a cinematographer. It's essential. You don't have to have a designer in the theatre. You don't have to have anything or anybody. You've got a bunch of naked actors on the stage, but the cinematographer. So his, I've worked with various cinematographers, and there are people, respectable, good, practical, craftspeople who, at the BBC, for example, who, would show up in time for the shoot, having just made a documentary about a farming program or whatever, and would shoot the film properly and professionally, but there'd be no input or discussion or experimentation or tests or anything to do with the spirit of the film, the look of the film and all of that. But of course we're talking about feature films. Now it's standard for feature films to have discussion about, but about the aesthetic and the spirit and the mood and all those things. Dick Pope and I, in collaboration with our designers, would, at a certain point during my development process period with the actors, there would be an agreed deadline, a point at which I would be committed to say what was emerging and how I imagined it, what we are potentially talking about. And he would then pick up on that and shoot tests, and it was a very sophisticated and a profound process, really. And it's a loss. That's all I have to say.
Do you think it's interesting you mentioned documentaries? Do you think that Dick's long background in documentary made him or contributed to his being very open to the kind of process that he was going to encounter?
Absolutely. But I mean, actually, the main thing about that, there are two things actually. One is that he had a real sense of the real world, a real passion to depict the real world. And, he spent years doing the, World in Action and those things for Granada and all those. And, going into, with hidden cameras into, illegal places in the Far East and doing all that stuff in the middle of the desert and stuff, But, I mean, you could suppose from that he would come to dramatic, heightened feature films with the wrong, with an inclination to shoot in the documentary mode. Absolutely not. He was extremely sophisticated and, had a great sense of classical cinema and things. And of course, with this film, in some ways, you could say that the aesthetic of this film is not as, if you like, as obvious as, say, for example, Naked or Topsy-Turvy or even Happy-Go-Lucky.
Yeah, they're the three examples I would have of...
Yeah, because there are obviously, we did extreme, or in fact, another year where I was a little bit woolly about exactly what it should be, and so he shot 4 different kinds of looks, and that gave me the idea to do it in spring, summer, autumn and winter, which fed back into the narrative. But here, it was subtler, but, there's no question, he really gets the spirit of particularly the way that the contrast between the two main homes and all that, but not only those. I mean, there's a subtle way of looking at things that is there in this film.
Yeah. So, very much in memoriam, Dick.
Yeah,
I
mean, you spent time with him. So,
yeah, he was great. Funny, just a very big-hearted guy. Really?
He would want us to move on.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Here's the thing I want to ask you about this one before I throw it out to the lions, the audience, which is about loose ends and about what we know and what we don't know about the characters. And in an imagined standard film about domestic, everything would have been explained. Everything about Kirtley's relationship with his mother, for example, or every detail of Pansin Chantal's relationship with Pearl, and it all would have been explained. And you've never done that. You've never considered it how can I say? I mean, backstories emerge, but the thing is, in your way of working, the backstories are so detailed that it would be impossible to get them on the screen.
I mean, they are. I mean, they're completely thoroughly created, particularly around the central characters and relationships. But that means, I mean, actually, if you think about the cemetery scene and the scenes that follow, you do actually, we're able to allow you to access stuff about. Now, if we hadn't created it absolutely totally and three-dimensionally, we wouldn't be able to just, in an organic and truthful way, just have the whole iceberg available so we could work out exactly how much tip of the iceberg to show. But you have to have the whole thing there so that you can, otherwise it's just surface. And therefore you would compensate for that by inventing all kinds of information. But because it's there, I mean, you know, like at one point when they're back at after the cemetery, when Chantal takes Panty into the bedroom, that's when you get that their dad had left. That's the only reference to it.
Yeah.
Now, that we arrived at that organically. I mean, it could have been self-consciously put into the cemetery scene, but the things that happened in the cemetery just evolved organically by our exploration, just allowing certain things to. So, I mean, I think I appreciate what you're saying and that you're identifying that. But the thing about the backstories, as I say, is it's important that we create them absolutely three-dimensionally and in depth so that they're there as the foundations and you don't feel that you have to dredge it all up to the surface and let it all hang out and in an unreal or unnecessary or unimplicit way.
Yeah, in a heavy-handed expository way, which is
that's right. Yeah.
I've got one other minor thing, which is it's not that minor actually. There's this key line in the film for me.
This what? Sorry.
A key line in the film where Chantal takes it's Kayla back into the bedroom, isn't it?
Yes.
And she says, Kayla says, "Am I not kind?" And that seems to me it's rather like the dilemmas in Another Year as well. How does everybody else deal with the kind of level of distress and anger in a character like Pansy, in a person like Pansy, in a person like Mary in Another Year, in a person like Johnny in Naked? And it feels like a very key question that I'm taking massively out of context, but it feels like something that's very germane over all your work. Would you care to comment on that?
I suppose the short answer to that is no. But I don't really know whether I can, really. In a way, I think what you say is correct.
That'll do.
I can't. Yeah. No, I can't. I don't know whether I can, really. I mean...
But I've only just noticed it. I mean, I must have seen it
a
few hundred times.
I know this is a cop-out. I'd have to think about that.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, on that happy note, I'll throw it open to our friends here. Does anybody have a question for Mike? The roving Mike will come and talk to. Yes, hooray! Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Amazing film. Could you talk about how you found the end of the story?
Well, when you say how, what do you mean?
The film ends very beautifully, but it could have ended earlier or later in the story.
Do you mean how or why?
From a storytelling point of view, why there?
Well, for me, what's important, and I've done this a lot in my films, is to say to you, the audience, okay, over to you. We could have explored and created some kind of resolution. Theoretically, I don't actually know what resolution that would be, because it's a very, very complex and dangerous situation. And it just reached, I think this answers your question, it just, at the point we got it to, I felt, well, there's an infinite number of, there are a whole lot of possibilities here. Nothing will be gained by simply doggedly flogging through one or other of those possibilities, because the important thing is for you is, what are those possibilities, and for you to take that away and ponder and reflect on, and etc., and argue about, if you like. I mean, there are things that happen in that last passage of the film, which I won't even identify because you've just seen it, which it would be quite wrong for me to explain the motivation, or theorise or indeed pontificate about. And I think that sort of answers your question. It felt to me the natural way to bring the film to a conclusion, which isn't the same as bringing the relationship to a conclusion, because that's something that I want to linger for you. Does that make sense?
That's great, thank you. Another. Thank you.
I was going to say that I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and one of the dysfunctions was that I had a sister who was an anorexic. And I remember 30 years ago seeing Life is Sweet. And it was the first honest representation of somebody with an eating disorder that I'd seen. So thank you for that. And I wonder how you managed to develop the dynamics of family relationships and have them reflected, but that they're so real.
So I don't quite get the actual question.
You're portraying the dynamics of family relationships that come across as being completely authentic. And are there any that you find difficult with, or how do you manage that?
How do you manage to create the dynamics of?
Well, again, it's by we create and explore these characters and their relationships, their families, etc., in a very thorough and completely three-dimensional way. I suppose, to answer your question, by starting, I don't start from the premise of what will be interesting or what will be entertaining, because I assume that everybody is interesting and entertaining. Everybody is, people say to me, well, where do you get your ideas for the films? Where do you get your ideas from? And the truth is, you've only got to walk down the street. For me, I walk down the street for a few minutes, and there are if there are 10 people, there are 10 possible films. I mean, everybody is potentially interesting, and so I start from the premise of creating real worlds with real people who are, for me, inherently interesting, whoever they are, whatever they are, and thus by exploring those and then distilling it into something that into something dramatic and therefore meaningful. By definition, you're able to deal with all kinds of people and issues and problems and things, and hopefully it's real, if that makes any sense, you know.
I mean, it's a function. The feeling that these people know each other and it has that level of truth is a function of your working method. That slowly, individual characters come together.
Yes, I think that's right. Although in a way, that's a back to front. You're right, but in a way, that's back to front because in fact, the important thing is to create a real world, and the procedures that we deploy to make that happen are to serve the content.
That, yeah. I suppose it's what you don't do is to come up with. It's entirely organic. I think that's an important thing for people to understand from my experience of it. It isn't top down in any way at all. It isn't you sitting at home thinking, I am going to do a film about a depressed woman with an incredible wit. That isn't it. It's the opposite of that. You start off...
But that isn't to say that it starts to emerge that that's what we're dealing with. But obviously there are different levels and different. Obviously there are plenty of examples in my various films of where we've said, okay, well let's deal with this specific thing.
Well, Vera Drake is the obvious example where it's about an abortionist, but it's about the issue of abortion.
That's right.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Sort of.
Another. Hello.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the film. The funeral scene, I'm just a bit obsessed by it. Can I ask 2 questions about it?
Oh, go on then.
Thank you. Firstly,
you mean the funeral scene or the?
Sorry, the cemetery. The cemetery. Yeah, the cemetery scene. The motorbikes. That's the first part of the question. Was that planned? And if it wasn't, I mean, it's a happy accident. Could you talk a bit about happy accident in your film?
Well, it wasn't a happy accident at all. Actually, what happened is this: my son Leigh made a feature film called Sweet Sue a couple of years ago, which some of you will have seen. I think it's shown here. A very nice film about a middle-aged woman who goes to a biker's funeral, meets a biker, and has a relationship with him. So as a kind of homage to my son, I decided to get a bikers cortege with a bunch of bikers and have them around in the cemetery when we did the cemetery scene. So it was a deliberate thing. Actually, you might be interested to know that we had them around. We constructed the scene, the actual main action around the grave. I actually had the notion when we were before shooting the scene on the day we shot it at Kensal Rise Cemetery. My assumption was that they would pass by this bikers cortege on the way to the grave. But suddenly, when I was working with them I suddenly thought that actually that's really throwing away a poetic moment. And then I had the idea of it going past at the end of the scene on the way out, and I feel that really does work. To deal with the second part of your question about things happening by accident, at one level, everything that we have done, it comes out of exploring and improvising things. But in terms of the kind of accident that you maybe are assuming that perhaps there happened to be a biker's cortege around. I mean, actually, it's all much more deliberate and conscious than that. And on the whole, those sort of accidents, I'm not really very interested in, really.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's great. There. Thank you.
Hello. I wonder if you could speak about your collaboration with the editing team and kind of how you figured out the structure that the film kind of ended up in.
My relationship with editors, and this film was brilliantly edited by Tanya Reddin, it is at one level fairly conventional. I mean, what we take to because of the way that I structure, and I'll talk about the structure in a minute, the way we structure and shoot these films, what we take to the cutting room, to the editing, is pretty disciplined, really. This is not mine, and not the kind of film where you are trying to make sense of a whole lot of wild footage, which slightly relates to your question, I think, because that isn't what it is. I mean, everyone knows that there's a massive amount of improvisation involved in arriving at the end product of my films, but you never see any improvisation in front of the camera. It's very, very tightly rehearsed, scripted through rehearsal, and I write a structure before we start shooting, a provisional structure, and we work with that and deviate from it if we want to, and But as I say, what we take to the cutting room is fairly disciplined. So specifically, to answer your question, of course, within that, it's about, you may restructure it or throw things out or decide to swap something around or whatever. But in broad terms, it is about carrying out the structure. But when we're shooting, because I'm concerned with behaviour and the subtleties and nuances of behaviour, so quite often when we're shooting, we might do a take, and we've done several, and then I say, oh, good, let's go again. And everybody says, why? Why, that was great. Well, why do you want to go again? And it's because my instinct is that it's about subtle nuances of moments. And those are the things that we then are able to orchestrate or calibrate and choose at the editing stage. And then, of course, there's our collaboration with the score, and we just do that without anybody else around, but then we share it with the editor, and Tanya came and looked at it and made some observations. We decide where to have music and where not, and importantly in this film, it's an important decision that we made to have no music in that final section, except briefly when we go to Piccadilly Circus, when Moses is about to change his life. But it's about exploring what you can do within the discipline of what we've shot. Does that make sense?
Anything? Anybody? Anybody else? Anybody? Yes, there's one in the front row.
So I was going to ask that, given the times that we're living in at the moment, how did it feel to produce a film that had, I guess, relatively few uplifting moments?
Very what?
Very few uplifting moments. Joyous, I don't, you know how I mean that.
Well, the question is, do you think it's got any uplifting moments?
I felt like maybe the nieces, some of the kind of fun nieces and the sister. Yeah. But I feel, some of your other movies like Happy Go Lucky,
Are you saying, just so we get to down to the nitty gritty here, are you saying that it didn't have any uplifting moments, or they didn't have enough uplifting moments, or you found it too depressing, or what are you saying?
I did feel, relatively depressing. It would have been, I know.
What would you have liked? No, I've got to ask you that because
I don't know. I could see certain things resonate. I've got, I think one of the gentlemen says I think we all have friends or relatives that might, experience some of those kind of, I guess, mental health conditions.
Did you laugh at all at any stage?
I did. Yes, yeah. I kind of, I did. But
I mean, look, here's the thing. I'm dodging around. I'm trying to.
I suppose I came here. I feel like we're living in bleak times. I'm sure many people do feel like we're living in quite low and bleak times. Is that, is it? Would you say that you did it in that way because it's reflective of the times?
No, I mean, it is what it is because it is what it is. I mean, frankly. and I don't really. It's not. You see, in a way, with respect to your question, what you're really saying is, did I deliberately make it like this and not like that? But that's not doesn't crop up. I mean, it is an exploration into what it's about, and it's. I mean, what is this? This is slightly related to your question, which is why I asked you whether you laughed at all, because. I wasn't present in this screening, but on the whole, what tends to happen, what has happened consistently, and you will report whether it happened this evening, is that right from the word go, there's a lot of laughs, and then all of a sudden, at a certain stage, the laughter stops. And people have said to me, was that a deliberate construct? And the answer is no. That simply comes out organically from the nature of what is going on, basically. Which isn't to say that, of course, that we are in any way trivial about the important, serious things that are happening, or we trivialise it, or that we dressed anything up in order to lighten to sweeten the pill, or lighten the load, or whatever it is. Because I haven't done any of those things. I mean, it is completely organic. And different people react to it in different ways. I mean, a lot of people have said, and you're obviously not saying this, I think you're not saying this, that in the end, they found a great sympathy and empathy with Pansy, despite her behaviour. I mean, it varies because, for me, all these kind of various and contradictory reactions to the films I make. When you mentioned Happy-Go-Lucky, now, I mean, Happy-Go-Lucky, people have said, some people said they couldn't stand that woman. She just was so... But in fact, she's very grounded and very committed, intelligent, but with a sense of humour, So for me, the thing of making films that are a hope and that intend to be grounded in a reality means that they are complex, and everybody really will react. People react to things, to what's going on in all sorts of different ways, and that would include you.
I think we're heading towards a close, and I just wanted to ask a fairly obvious question about plans and futures and plans and things that you would like to do. Another film, for example. Because I know people have asked me about it.
Well, because I'm quite old and disabled, we're hoping to make another film. I obviously won't talk about what I think that will be. What I would like to do, although I suspect that now becomes what I would like to have done, because I think the chances are it won't happen. And in a way, the project that we offered to the BBC, asked the BBC to be involved in, would be an example of this. When we've made the period films, Topsy-Turvy in particular, and Mr. Turner, and not least Peter Lou, because we've been able to say to potential backers, this is what it's going to be about, although we can't say much about it, but that's the premise. We've been able to get much bigger budgets. Because I never were able to say what a film is going to be, and we only get the backing on the basis of trust. What we failed to do is to get a much bigger budget to make a contemporary film of some complexity. And that's what I would like to do, or as I say, probably more appropriately to say I would like to have done. So although we are talking about making another film in the near future, and we have got some interest, we're never going to get the kind of funding that would require. But I think that answers your question.
It does.
But as to a specific subject, that's not...
No, I wouldn't have asked you anyway. So that's it. It's the end of, for now, our little peregrinations at the garden. You never know when we'll be back here. Thank you very much to the Garden Cinema for hosting us. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Mike Leigh.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.